The autumn breeze carried the scent of old wood and decay as Johnny Depp walked down the narrow streets of New Orleans' French Quarter. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and he was scouting locations for his upcoming movie. His boots clicked against the worn cobblestones as he followed his production assistant, Sarah, who was busy checking addresses on her tablet. "The next property is just around the corner, Mr. Depp," Sarah said, pointing to a tall, abandoned mansion with faded blue paint and crooked shutters. The house stood out among its well-maintained neighbors, its neglected state a mystery in this historic district. Johnny adjusted his tinted glasses and stared at the building. Something about it caught his attention, perhaps the way the sunlight cast strange shadows through its broken windows, or how the ivy had claimed most of its eastern wall. He had seen hundreds of old houses during his career, but this one felt different. "Let's take a look inside," he said, following Sarah up the creaking steps to the front porch. The production team's security guard, Mike, moved ahead to check if it was safe to enter. The old brass doorknob turned surprisingly easily, and the heavy wooden door swung open with a long, drawn-out groan. Inside, dust particles danced in the beams of light that broke through the grimy windows. The air was thick with the musty smell of abandonment. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floors as they moved from room to room, examining the space for potential filming locations. "The architecture is perfect for the scene we discussed," Sarah commented, taking photos with her phone. "These high ceilings and Victorian details could work really well." Johnny nodded absently, his attention drawn to something else. In the stillness of the house, he heard a sound, so faint it could have been his imagination. It was like the scatter of small feet across old wood, coming from somewhere above them. "Did you hear that?" he asked, looking up at the ceiling. Sarah and Mike paused, listening. The sound came again, clearer this time. "Probably just rats," Mike suggested, but Johnny was already moving toward the staircase. His instincts, honed by years of experiencing the unexpected, told him this was something else. The stairs protested under their weight as they climbed to the second floor. Here, the air was even thicker with dust, and cobwebs stretched across corners like forgotten lace. Johnny followed the sounds, which led them to another staircase, a narrower one that presumably led to the attic. "Mr. Depp, maybe we should come back with proper equipment," Sarah suggested, but Johnny was already halfway up the attic stairs. The wooden steps were sturdy despite their age, and his curiosity pushed him forward. The attic was a large space filled with old furniture covered in white sheets, looking like silent ghosts in the dim light. Some beams broke through small windows, creating paths through the dusty air, and there, behind a large covered armoire, came the sound again. Johnny moved slowly, careful not to make sudden movements. As he rounded the corner of the armoire, he stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes widened behind his glasses, and for a moment, he forgot to breathe. There, huddled in a makeshift bed of old blankets and couch cushions, was a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dirty blonde hair and wide, frightened eyes. The child was thin, wearing clothes that seemed too big for his small frame. "Hello," Johnny said softly, kneeling down to appear less threatening. "I'm Johnny. What's your name?" The boy stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, "Michael." Sarah gasped behind them, already pulling out her phone to call the authorities. Mike moved closer, his security training kicking in as he assessed the situation. But Johnny stayed focused on the boy, noticing how he clutched something in his small hands. A silver pocket watch that caught the dim light, and an old photograph that was worn at the edges. "Are you here alone, Michael?" Johnny asked gently. The boy nodded, then spoke in a voice that was surprisingly clear despite his apparent fear. "Mom's in the hospital. She said to wait here. She said she'd come back." Johnny felt his heart tighten in his chest. As he looked at the boy more closely, there was something hauntingly familiar about his features, something that tugged at his memory, though he couldn't quite place it. What he didn't know then, as he sat in that dusty attic with the frightened child, was that this chance encounter would unravel a story more extraordinary than any movie he had ever made. The police arrived within 20 minutes, their sirens breaking the quiet afternoon in the French Quarter. 2 patrol cars and a child services vehicle parked outside the old mansion, their lights reflecting off the dusty windows. Johnny hadn't moved from his spot near Michael, worried that any sudden change might frighten the boy even more. Social worker Lisa Martinez climbed the stairs to the attic, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. She carried a small backpack that Johnny knew probably contained snacks, water, and clean clothes, things she always brought for cases like this. But Michael shrank back when she approached, moving closer to Johnny instead. "It's okay," Johnny said softly, noticing how the boy's hands trembled around the silver pocket watch he held. "They're here to help." The police officers searched the rest of the house, finding evidence that someone had been living there for months. In a corner of the attic, they discovered a small collection of canned food, bottles of water, and a battery-powered lamp. There were also school books and notebooks filled with careful handwriting. Michael had been trying to keep up with his studies even in these conditions. "Michael," Lisa said gently, sitting on an old trunk nearby, "can you tell us about your mom? Where was she staying in the hospital?" The boy looked at Johnny first, as if seeking permission to speak. When Johnny nodded encouragingly, Michael's voice came out quiet but clear. "Mercy Hospital. She got really sick. She said she'd come back in a few days. That was a long time ago." Johnny felt his chest tighten. The boy had been waiting faithfully, probably scared and hungry, but determined to follow his mother's instructions. Lisa made some quick calls to the hospital, her face growing serious as she listened to responses on the other end. "We found her," Lisa said after hanging up. "Sarah Bennett, admitted 3 months ago for severe pneumonia. Lisa paused, glancing at Michael before continuing more quietly to Johnny. "She fell into a coma 2 weeks after admission. No one knew she had a child waiting for her." Michael was still clutching the photograph, and Johnny finally got a better look at it. It showed a younger woman with Michael's same blonde hair, smiling at the camera. But what caught Johnny's attention was the background. It looked like a movie set, though he couldn't quite place which one. "Would you like to show me what you're holding?" Johnny asked Michael, pointing to the pocket watch. The boy hesitated before slowly opening his palm, revealing an ornate silver timepiece that made Johnny's breath catch. He recognized it immediately, the detailed engravings, the small dent on the side. But it couldn't be. "Where did you get this watch?" Johnny asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mom said it was Dad's," Michael replied, his fingers tracing the patterns on the silver surface. "She said he was a famous writer who wrote stories about adventures and truth. But I never met him." The police and social workers were discussing arrangements for Michael. He would need a medical checkup, temporary housing, and they would have to start looking for any relatives. But Johnny barely heard them. His mind was racing, connecting dots he hadn't even known existed. That watch, he had given it to Hunter Thompson years ago, during the filming of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It was a special piece, custom-made with specific engravings that Johnny now saw clearly on its surface. The movie set in the photograph suddenly made sense too. "Lisa," Johnny called to the social worker, his voice serious. "I think I might know something about Michael's father. We'll need to do some checking first." Michael looked up at him with those familiar eyes, eyes that Johnny now realized he had seen before, in a different face, years ago. The boy's features, which had seemed vaguely familiar in the dim attic light, now struck him with shocking clarity. As the afternoon sun began to fade outside, Johnny made a decision. He couldn't leave this boy to face the system alone, not when he might be holding the key to Michael's past. He'd seen too many coincidences in the last hour to ignore them. "I'd like to help with the investigation," he told Lisa. "There's something about this situation that I need to understand better." What Johnny didn't say was that he was almost certain he knew who Michael's father was, and that knowledge would change everything for everyone involved. 3 days had passed since finding Michael in the old mansion. Johnny sat in his hotel suite, staring at his phone where pictures of the silver pocket watch filled the screen. He had canceled several meetings, much to his agent's frustration, but this mystery consumed his thoughts. The temporary foster home where Michael stayed was a cheerful yellow house in a quiet neighborhood. Mrs. Rodriguez, the foster mother, had over 20 years of experience caring for children in difficult situations. When Johnny's car pulled up outside her house that morning, Michael was sitting on the front porch, drawing in a notebook. "Mr. Depp." Michael's face lit up as Johnny walked toward him. The boy looked better already, clean clothes, combed hair, and some color returning to his cheeks after proper meals. "Hey, buddy." Johnny smiled, sitting down on the porch steps beside him. "How are you doing here?" "Mrs. Rodriguez makes really good pancakes," Michael said, showing Johnny his drawing. It was a detailed sketch of the pocket watch, every pattern carefully copied. "Mom taught me to draw." She said Dad liked to draw too, in his notebooks. Johnny nodded, remembering Hunter Thompson's journals filled with sketches and wild ideas. Your mom was right. I knew someone who drew just like this. He pulled out his phone and showed Michael some old photos he'd found. Pictures from the Fear and Loathing set that he'd saved over the years. Michael's eyes grew wide at one particular photo. That's Mom. He pointed at a young woman in the background, carrying film equipment. She looked so happy there. Mrs. Rodriguez brought them lemonade and cookies, watching with a gentle smile as Johnny and Michael looked through more photos. The social workers had agreed to let Johnny visit after he explained his suspicions about Michael's father to them privately. Michael, Johnny said carefully, can you tell me more about what your mom told you about your dad? The boy put down his cookie, becoming serious. She said he was different from other people, that he saw the world in a special way. She said he wrote about strange and wonderful things, and that's why people loved his stories. Michael paused, then added quietly, she said he died before I was born, but that he would have loved me if he'd known about me. Johnny felt his throat tighten. Everything Michael said matched what he knew about Hunter. Sarah must have found out she was pregnant after Hunter's death in 2005 and made the difficult decision to raise Michael alone. Your father was a remarkable man, Johnny found himself saying. He was one of the most brilliant writers I've ever known. He was brave and honest, and he fought for what he believed in. Michael's eyes widened. You knew my dad? I did. He was my friend. Johnny reached into his jacket and pulled out an old book, a first edition of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas that he brought with him. This is one of your father's most famous books. Would you like to see it? With trembling hands, Michael took the book. He opened it carefully, running his fingers over the pages as if they might contain some message meant just for him. What was his name? He whispered. Hunter S. Thompson. Johnny replied softly. And looking at you now, I can see him in your face, in the way you draw, and how carefully you observe things. Tears filled Michael's eyes, but he didn't let them fall. Instead, he sat up straighter, just like Hunter used to do when he was processing something important. Is that why you kept visiting me? Because you knew. I suspected, Johnny admitted. The watch you have, I gave it to Hunter many years ago. When I saw you with it, and then saw your mother in that old photograph from the movie set, things started making sense. Mrs. Rodriguez had quietly stepped back inside, giving them privacy for this moment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch as Michael opened up about all the questions he'd always had about his father, questions that had lived in his heart, unasked and unanswered. Johnny stayed for hours, sharing stories about Hunter that made Michael laugh and wonder. With each tale, he watched the boy's face light up with recognition, as if pieces of himself were finally making sense. It wasn't just about discovering who his father was anymore, it was about Michael finding out who he was too. The hallways of Mercy Hospital were quiet in the early morning hours. Johnny walked beside Lisa Martinez, his boots making soft sounds on the polished floor. After a week of legal paperwork and DNA tests, they were finally here to see Michael's mother, Sarah Bennett. She's been showing signs of improvement, the nurse told them as they approached room 415. She's still weak, but she's been conscious more often and able to talk. Johnny paused outside the door, remembering the young woman from the old photograph. The person they found inside the room was much thinner, her blonde hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes, they were exactly like Michael's. Sarah turned her head slowly as they entered. Recognition flickered across her face when she saw Johnny, followed by confusion and then sudden fear. Michael, she whispered, trying to sit up. Where's Michael? He's safe, Johnny said quickly, moving to her bedside. He's staying with a wonderful foster family right now. We found him in the old house. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. I never meant to leave him so long. I thought I just had a bad cold. I told him to wait, to stay hidden because I was afraid they'd put him in the system. I didn't know I would. Her voice broke. Lisa stepped forward, her notepad ready. Miss Bennett, we need to talk about Michael's situation. But first, we need to confirm something. She glanced at Johnny, who nodded encouragingly. Sarah, Johnny said gently, pulling out the silver pocket watch that Michael had kept safe all this time. This belonged to Hunter Thompson. How did you come to have it? Sarah stared at the watch, her hands trembling as she reached for it. Hunter gave it to me, she whispered. The last night we were together. He said it was a reminder that time doesn't always move in straight lines. The story came out slowly. Sarah had been a young production assistant on Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, fascinated by both the movie's star and its subject. She and Hunter had grown close during filming, sharing late-night conversations about life, literature, and the search for truth. Their relationship had been brief but intense, ending when filming wrapped. "I didn't know I was pregnant until 2 months after his death," Sarah explained, tears running down her cheeks. By then, it felt too late to tell anyone. Hunter was gone, and his family was grieving. I didn't want to complicate their lives with an unexpected grandchild. Johnny listened, remembering those days after Hunter's death, the confusion and sadness that had hung over everyone who knew him. "But Michael deserved to know his father's family," he said softly. Sarah nodded, guilt clear on her face. "I told him everything I could about Hunter. I saved articles, bought his books, showed him pictures. I wanted Michael to know who his father was, even if we couldn't be part of his family's life." "Things are different now," Lisa said, opening her folder. "The DNA results confirm that Michael is Hunter's son. His family has already been notified, and they're eager to meet him." Sarah's eyes widened. "They know?" Johnny took her hand gently. "They're overjoyed, Sarah. They want to be part of Michael's life, and they understand why you made the choices you did." The morning light grew stronger outside the hospital window as they talked through the details. Sarah would need several more weeks of recovery, and with Hunter's family involved, there would be support for both her and Michael. The lonely years of keeping secrets were finally ending. "Can I see him?" Sarah asked, her voice stronger now. "Can I see my boy?" Johnny smiled. "He's actually waiting outside with Mrs. Rodriguez. He's been drawing pictures for you every day." He walked to the door and opened it, revealing Michael sitting in a chair, clutching his sketchbook. When Michael saw his mother, he ran to her bed, careful not to disturb the medical equipment as he hugged her. Johnny stepped back, watching mother and son reunite, seeing the pocket watch glinting on the bedside table, a symbol of the past that had brought them all to this moment. The truth about Michael's father was no longer a secret, but it was just the beginning of their story. 2 weeks after Sarah's reunion with Michael, Johnny sat in his lawyer's office in downtown New Orleans. The large windows overlooked the busy street below, but his attention was focused on the documents spread across the mahogany desk. Hunter Thompson's family had flown in from Colorado the previous day, and now everything was about to change. Anita Thompson, Hunter's widow, sat beside Johnny, her eyes bright with unshed tears as she looked at recent photos of Michael. "He has Hunter's smile," she said softly. "And the way he draws. It's exactly like Hunter used to do in his journals." The DNA test results lay in the center of the desk, confirming what they had all begun to suspect. The papers stated clearly, Michael Bennett was, without any doubt, Hunter Thompson's son. The legal team had prepared documents to officially add Michael to the Thompson family records. "There's something else you should see," Johnny said, pulling out the notebooks they'd found in Michael's makeshift home in the mansion. "He's been writing stories, just like his father." Anita carefully opened one of the notebooks, reading the wild adventures Michael had created, complete with detailed illustrations in the margins. His stories were about brave explorers searching for truth in a complicated world, themes that Hunter himself had written about for years. "When can we meet him?" Juan Thompson, Hunter's son and Michael's half-brother, asked from across the room. He had been quiet most of the morning, processing the news that he had a younger brother he never knew about. "Michael and Sarah are coming this afternoon," Johnny replied. "The doctors cleared her for a short trip from the hospital. She's nervous about meeting everyone, but she wants to do what's right for Michael." The family's lawyer explained the legal proceedings, how Michael would be officially recognized as Hunter's son, how he would have rights to his father's estate, and how the Thompson family wanted to ensure both Michael and Sarah would be taken care of. At 3 o'clock, there was a gentle knock on the office door. Michael entered first, wearing new clothes and carrying his precious sketchbook. Sarah followed in a wheelchair, still recovering but looking stronger than she had in the hospital. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had brought them, waited supportively by the door. The room fell silent as the Thompsons saw Michael in person for the first time. Juan stood up slowly, walking over to his younger brother. He knelt down to Michael's eye level, just as Johnny had done in the old mansion. "Hey there," Juan said warmly. "I'm your brother Juan. I've been looking at your drawings. They're amazing. Michael's eyes went wide. I have a brother. You have a whole family, Anita said, joining them. We're so happy to finally meet you, Michael. Sarah watched from her wheelchair, tears rolling down her cheeks as Michael was surrounded by his father's family. Johnny moved to stand beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. I should have told them sooner, she whispered to him. You did what you thought was best, Johnny assured her. What matters is now. The afternoon unfolded like a dream. Juan showed Michael old photos of Hunter that he'd never seen before. Anita brought one of Hunter's original typewriters, promising to give it to Michael when he was older. The lawyers quietly handled paperwork in the background as a family came together, bridging a gap of years and secrets. Look what Juan gave me, Michael said excitedly to Johnny, holding up one of Hunter's old press badges. He said Dad used to wear it when he wrote stories about important things. Johnny smiled, remembering Hunter wearing that very badge. Your dad believed that telling the truth was the most important job in the world, he said. As the sun began to set over New Orleans, casting long shadows through the office windows, Johnny watched Michael drawing with Juan, both of them laughing over shared stories. Sarah was talking quietly with Anita, years of worry finally easing from her face. Sometimes, Johnny thought, the most amazing stories aren't the ones we make in movies. They're the ones that life writes for us, bringing people together in ways we never could have imagined. A month had passed since the family reunion in the lawyer's office. The old mansion where Johnny had found Michael was now being renovated, transformed into a writing center for young people, a project that Juan and Anita had decided to fund in Hunter's memory. Johnny stood in what used to be the dusty attic, now cleaned and brightened with fresh paint. Sunlight streamed through new windows, illuminating the space where Michael had waited alone for so long. Construction workers moved around him, carrying materials and discussing plans. This is where it all started, Sarah said, walking up beside him. She looked healthier now, having been released from the hospital a week ago. She was staying in a comfortable apartment provided by the Thompson family, focusing on her recovery and rebuilding her life with Michael. Did you ever imagine things would turn out this way? Johnny asked, remembering the frightened boy he found hiding behind the old armoire. Sarah shook her head, smiling. Sometimes I still think I'm dreaming. Michael has a family now, a bigger one than I ever thought possible. The sound of laughter drifted up from the garden below. Michael was there with Juan, both of them working on a special project. They were creating an illustrated timeline of Hunter Thompson's life, combining Juan's memories with Michael's artistic talent. The timeline would be the first display in the new writing center. Look what we found in Dad's old things. Michael's excited voice carried up the stairs as he rushed into the attic, carrying a worn leather bag. Juan followed, grinning at his younger brother's enthusiasm. Inside the bag were Hunter's old travel journals, filled with notes and sketches from his journeys around the world. Michael handled them carefully, his eyes wide with wonder as he turned each page. These are going in the special collection room, Juan explained. But we thought you might want to look through them first, Michael. Dad's handwriting was pretty messy, though. Just like mine. Michael laughed, showing them a page where Hunter had scribbled notes in the margins, very similar to how Michael wrote in his own notebooks. Anita arrived later that afternoon, bringing more boxes of Hunter's belongings that she thought should be part of the writing center. She and Sarah sat together, sorting through photographs and letters, sharing stories about the man they had both loved in different ways. Hunter would have loved this, Johnny said, watching Michael and Juan carefully arrange their father's typewriters in a display case. A place where young writers can come to find their voice, just like he did. The renovation plans included a library filled with Hunter's favorite books, a workshop space for young journalists, and a gallery where students could display their work. Michael's drawings would have a special place, showing how Hunter's creative spirit lived on through his youngest son. Mr. Depp, Michael called out, waving him over to the window. Juan says we can put Dad's quote right here, in big letters where everyone can see it. The quote they had chosen was one of Hunter's most famous. Buy the ticket, take the ride. It would be painted across the wall in bold letters, encouraging young writers to be brave in their storytelling. As evening approached, the construction workers packed up for the day. The family gathered in what would soon be the main reading room, sharing pizza and stories. Michael sat between Juan and Sarah, his sketchbook open on his lap as he drew the scene before him, his family, together at last. You know, Johnny said to Sarah as they watched Michael showing his latest drawings to Anita, finding him that day in the attic wasn't just luck. It was like Hunter himself led us there. Sarah squeezed his hand gratefully. Hunter always said that life's strange turns often lead us exactly where we need to be. The silver pocket watch that had started it all sat in a special display case near the entrance, its surface catching the last rays of sunlight. Below it, a simple plaque told the story of how a lost boy found his family and how sometimes the most amazing stories are the ones that write themselves. In that moment, as laughter and love filled the once abandoned house, Johnny knew that Hunter's legacy would live on, not just through his words, but through the new connections and stories being created in this very place. The grand opening of the Hunter S. Thompson Youth Writing Center was scheduled for a bright Saturday morning in October. News crews gathered outside the renovated mansion, their cameras focused on the beautiful old building that had once been a lonely shelter for a lost boy. Johnny arrived early, watching the final preparations from the sidewalk. The mansion looked nothing like the abandoned house he walked into months ago. Fresh paint gleamed in the morning sun, and new gardens bloomed along the walkway. Above the entrance, a sign read Fear and Right, a playful tribute to Hunter's famous book that Michael had suggested. "Do you think there will be a lot of people?" Michael asked nervously, appearing beside Johnny. He wore a new blazer that matched Juan's, making them look even more like brothers despite their age difference. "Probably," Johnny smiled. "Your father had many friends and fans. They'll all want to see what we've created here." Inside, the transformation was even more remarkable. The once dusty rooms now housed state-of-the-art computers, writing stations, and reading nooks. The walls were covered with Hunter's quotes, photographs, and Michael's artwork. The attic, where their story had begun, was now a cozy creative space filled with comfortable chairs and writing desks. Sarah, looking healthy and confident, directed volunteers who were setting up refreshments. She had become the center's administrator, determined to help other young writers find their voice. Anita worked alongside her, hanging the last of Hunter's framed articles in the journalism room. "Look who's here," Juan called out, opening the door to welcome some special guests. Hunter's old friends and colleagues began arriving, famous writers, journalists, and activists who had worked with him over the years. Each of them carried a book or memento to donate to the center's collection. Michael watched in amazement as these people, who had known his father, shared stories about Hunter's dedication to truth and justice. One elderly journalist pulled Michael aside and told him, "You have your father's eyes, not just how they look, but how they see the world." At 11 o'clock, it was time for the opening ceremony. Johnny stood at the podium, looking out at the gathered crowd. Reporters held their cameras ready as he began to speak. "Sometimes the most incredible stories find us when we least expect them," he said. "A few months ago, I walked into this house looking for a movie location. Instead, I found a brave young boy who would lead us all on an amazing journey of discovery." Michael sat between Sarah and Juan in the front row, clutching his newest sketchbook. Inside were drawings of everything that had happened since that fateful day: the hospital reunion, meeting his new family, and the transformation of the old house into something wonderful. Hunter Thompson believed in giving voice to the truth, Johnny continued. "This center will carry on that mission by nurturing young writers, artists, and truth-tellers." And it all began because a little boy waited patiently in an attic, holding on to his father's pocket watch and his mother's love. After the speeches, Michael led tours of the center. He showed visitors the special collection room where Hunter's typewriters and journals were displayed. The silver pocket watch held a place of honor, its case illuminated to show the engravings that had helped solve the mystery. "This is my favorite room," Michael told the visitors, leading them to a sunny space filled with art supplies and writing desks. "It's where kids like me can come to tell their own stories." Late that afternoon, when most of the crowds had gone, the family gathered in the garden. Sarah watched Michael and Juan playing chess on a new stone table, while Anita shared stories with some lingering guests. Johnny sat nearby, taking in the scene of happiness that had grown from such an unexpected discovery. "You know," Sarah said, joining him on the bench, "Michael asked me something interesting this morning. He wanted to know if finding him in the attic was going to be in your next movie." Johnny laughed softly. "I told him some stories are better in real life than on the big screen. This is one of them." As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the writing center, Michael's laughter echoed through the garden. It was the sound of a boy who had found not just his past, but his future, all because of an old pocket watch and a chance discovery in a dusty attic. 1 year had passed since the opening of the Hunter S. Thompson Youth Writing Center. The autumn leaves danced in the breeze as Johnny walked up the familiar path to the mansion. The gardens were in full bloom, maintained by local volunteers who had embraced the center as part of their community. Inside, the sound of typing and quiet conversations filled the air. Young writers sat at desks, working on their stories while mentors moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement. Johnny smiled as he recognized some of Michael's artwork on the walls. New pieces that showed how much his talent had grown over the past year. "Uncle Johnny." Michael's voice called out from the top of the stairs. At 9 years old now, he had grown taller and more confident. He ran down to greet Johnny, carrying a thick manuscript in his hands. "I finished it. My first book." Johnny took the manuscript, titled The Attic Boy, a true story. Michael had spent months writing about his experiences, combining his memories with the stories he learned about his father. The pages were filled with his illustrations, bringing the story to life in a way that would have made Hunter proud. Sarah, who now ran writing workshops for young students, watched from her office doorway. She had fully recovered from her illness and had become an important part of the local literary community. "He's been up all night finishing it," she said with a proud smile. Juan arrived later that afternoon for his weekly visit. He had moved to New Orleans to be closer to his younger brother, taking a job as a journalism teacher at a nearby college. Together, the brothers had started a youth newspaper program at the center, teaching kids how to report on local issues that mattered to their community. "Look what came in the mail," Juan said, holding up a letter. It was from a major publishing house, expressing interest in the center's first anthology of student writing. Michael's story would be the opening piece. Anita joined them for dinner in the center's garden, where they had made it a tradition to gather every Thursday evening. The silver pocket watch, which had started their whole journey, had been temporarily removed from its display case for this special occasion. "It's time," Anita said, taking the watch from its velvet box. "Hunter would want you to have this now, Michael. Not just to keep in a display case, but to carry with you." Michael held the watch carefully, running his fingers over the familiar engravings. "But what about the visitors? They always want to see it in the collection." "We'll put a replica in the case," Johnny suggested. "The real one belongs with you. It's what brought our family together." Later that evening, as the sun set over New Orleans, they gathered in what used to be the attic. The space had become Michael's favorite writing spot, transformed from a place of loneliness into one of creativity and joy. Students' works covered the walls, their stories and poems reflecting Hunter's spirit of truth-telling and adventure. "Sometimes I can hardly remember what it was like before," Michael said, sitting at his writing desk, "when I was alone up here." "You were never really alone," Johnny replied. "You had your father's watch, your mother's love, and a whole future waiting to be discovered." Sarah wiped away tears as she read the dedication page of Michael's book. "To my father, Hunter S. Thompson, who taught me through his words that truth is worth waiting for. To my mother, who protected me with her love. To my brother Juan, who showed me how to carry our father's legacy. To Anita, who welcomed me into the family I never knew I had. And to Johnny Depp, who found a scared little boy in an attic and helped him find his way home." As night fell over the writing center, the family shared stories and dreams. Michael's book would soon reach readers around the world, telling a story of love, discovery, and the unexpected ways families can find each other. The silver pocket watch ticked softly in his pocket, keeping time for new adventures yet to come. The old mansion, once a place of secrets and loneliness, had become a beacon of hope and creativity for young writers. And somewhere, Johnny thought, Hunter Thompson was smiling down on his youngest son, proud of the truth-teller he was becoming. The story that began with a chance discovery in a dusty attic had become something more, a testament to the power of family, both the ones we're born into and the ones we find along the way.